Guys, Citlali is the second 5-star that is coming out in 5.2, and today I will tell you how she works and how good she seems to be at the moment. So, as I just said, Citlali is a 5-star and her element is Cryo. The last Cryo unit we got before her came out a whole year ago, so she comes to aid an element that is in dire need of help. Her role, however, is that of a shielder, a niche that isn't unprecedented for Cryo, as both Layla and Diona have been competent at that for a long while, and in general Citlali will be the 5th defensive unit to join the element. Still, unlike all of these other characters, she has offensive utility that sets her apart. In fact, her shield comes from her Elemento skill, that other than setting your team up defensively, it will also enable a damage over time effect tied to a Night Soul Blessing state. This is already really meaningful for Citlali, because it makes her a defensive character that can efficiently trigger the scroll set from a field and constantly provide the team damage bonus effects. This is great even compared to an amazing character like Shilonen, who is a healer and can use the scroll set, but doesn't have a field damage, so she has more issues setting up the artifact effects for multiple elements of the team, for example. Secondarily, the Night Soul Blessing state comes with another supportive effect through her passive, which makes her reduce resistance to both Pyro and Hydro by 20% when freeze or melt reactions are triggered by any character on the team. Cryo is not included in this list of elements, and so this means that by design, Citlali is more meant to support characters outside of her own element. Just to compare her to someone else in the same niche, Zhongli is the same resistance reduction effects values, but for all elements unconditionally. On the other hand, while Citlali is more restricted in these sets, she has access to a supportive artifact set that easily surpasses all of Zhongli's options in value. As a result, she's probably going to be the best shielder in the game in terms of offensive utility. Moving on, her damage over time effect has a special property, namely it only actually activates after she has at least 50 Night Soul points. This is initially a problem, because she starts with 24 points right after using her skill. In this regard, she can immediately reach the required threshold by using an Elemental Burst, a 60 energy cost ability that will give her 27 points. On top of that, it produces a Cryo hit that partially scales off attack and partially through Elemental Mastery to her second passive. The latter in particular is really nice in some scenarios, because building Elemental Mastery also increases her reaction damage, and on teams where she can trigger Melt, the burst shapes up to be a massive single hit attack. This means that not only Citlali is much better than other shielders in terms of offensive utility, but also in terms of damage. Regarding the elemental skill's damage effect, after she crosses the 50 points threshold, it will start by unleashing a cryo attack every second, and each of those will consume 8 points. The 50 points requirement is only needed for the attack chain to start initially, and it won't stop after her point total falls below the threshold. Other than the burst, Citlali can also gain points from both of her passives, and she can expect to reach between 80 and 90 points per rotation. As a result, she has solid field presence as a cryo applier, as the skill hits produce cryo application once every 2 attacks, and this ties well with her supporting Pyro character specifically, because it means she can fit on melt teams potentially. Having said all of this, the other factor here is how she stacks up in terms of defensive utility. To start off, just like her attacks, her shield scales off of Elemental Mastery. This is pretty nice, because usually defensive characters have different scalings between their attacks and shield, and while their potential damage is not the greatest, they're often forced to minimize it if they want to prioritize the shield. Citlali can build both up simultaneously, and that makes her really unique in her niche. That said, it's not all smooth as it sounds. To begin with, if she wants to take advantage of the very meaningful offensive side of her kit, she has to use her burst every rotation in order to build up Night Soul points. This can require between 160 and 180 energy recharge depending on the team, even assuming she's using a Favonius weapon, and this limits how much she can invest on Elemental Mastery, of course. Secondarily, the scroll set doesn't really affect her defensive utility, as it mostly focuses on increasing her offensive support. Characters like Zhongli can use artifacts like Tenacity or other sets that solely focus on increasing their shield scaling stats in general. Technically, Citlali can do the same, of course, but in that case she will lose the majority of her offensive advantages over other shielders, which is a shame. Third, her kit simply isn't packed with shield boosting effects. Characters like Layla and Zhongli get several extra damage absorption effects in their kit that massively increase their shield's durability over the base scaling, but Citlali has none of that. All of this means that their shield is typically way below the competition, and in general is one of the least valuable in the game. Basically, from a kit design standpoint, she's trading defensive usefulness for offensive value, which might be good or bad for you depending on what kind of player you are. The positive angle here, however, is that she's essentially a defensive character that can be best in slot offensively for several units in the game. But before I talk about that, let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. And also go check my new Instagram and TikTok accounts. So, in terms of teams, as her passive implies, Citlali mainly synergizes with contexts that include Pyro or Hydro damage. The obvious fit here is on teams that include Pyro DPS that will benefit from all of our offensive utility and possibly even melt off of our Cryo application. Having said that, while Citlali's application is significant, it won't be enough by itself to consistently enable these melts for most of the Pyro DPS in the game. As a result, you will just have to combine her with other supports in that sense. A possible solution here is using a Vape Melt team that adds an off-field Hydra player to the bunch. The thought process here is that you'll have a strong Hydra player like Yelan, Xingqiu, Furina continuously hit the opponents to guarantee consistent vapes at least. Starting from that, if the Hydra application is significant, it will persist on opponents, and when Citlali applies Pyro, this will cause them to get frozen. Pyro units can then trigger melts by hitting the frozen enemies and amplify their damage even further. Currently, a team like this ranks as one of the very best for characters like Arlecchino and Yoimiya, so Pyro DPS that don't have very fast Pyro application frequency, and so they allow their support to set up their own application consistently. On the opposite, somebody like Hu Tao will probably have more issues in this scenario with most Hydro supports, since she applies Pyro much faster and depletes the Hydro gauge much more as a result. I expect this to work nicely with Xingqiu on team, but probably not if you just use Yelan, and so I wouldn't consider this option a ceiling raiser for her. Still, this tactic is a major disadvantage, and that's that bosses can get frozen essentially. This not only means that the Cryo application won't be doing anything beneficial here, but on the contrary, it might prove to be a negative because while it won't actually cause the bosses to freeze, it will still trigger the actual reaction, and when this happens, the Hydro aura will be depleted by a certain amount. Basically, it might cause you to miss some vapes. A possible solution here is to simply play a double Cryo team and to go full Sand Melt instead, for example. Characters like Rosaria and Keia fit well here because they can consistently apply Cryo in a short window, and in combination with Citlali, they can create enough aura for some Pyro characters to melt. Currently, I really like this team for Arlecchino, especially because it makes it so the only highly contested unit on her teams is Bennett. It seems it also is one of her ceiling teams in terms of output, so the outlook is great at the moment. Moreover, Citlali is very good for Chaska as well. Currently, Chaska's best teams include combinations of Pyro, Cryo, and Hydro units, since she can trigger Vapor Melt that way. Citlali happens to reduce reductions for 2 of those elements, and she can also hold the scroll set, so she's a fantastic support here. Currently, it seems that this is Chaska's best team at Constellation 0 damage output-wise, which is amazing considering Citlali also makes the comp much better defensively. There is probably much more I can say about Citlali, but for now I'll end it here because this is all I calculated currently. I like her a lot. She's a good offensive unit that also provides a lot of defensive utility on top of that, and so she'll have a steady place on a lot of meta teams in my opinion. And I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe and also go check my Mafuika first impressions video made a few days ago. Bye bye.